In this video, you are going to learn English through a true and fascinating story. Today's story is about Nellie Bly, one of the most courageous journalists in history. As you listen, you will not only discover what happened to her, but you will also improve your English step by step. If you enjoy learning English in this way, please support the channel. You can like this video, subscribe, and if you would like to help even more, you can support me on Ko-fi. The link is in the description. Now, let's begin the story. Nellie Bly was one of the most famous investigative journalists of the 19th century, and her work changed the way people thought about mental health institutions. She was born in 1864 in Pennsylvania, in the United States, and her real name was Elizabeth Cochran. At a time when women had very limited opportunities in journalism, she decided to become a reporter and write about serious social issues. She chose the name Nellie Bly as a pen name, and she quickly became known for her courage and determination. In 1887, when she was only 23 years old, she began working for the New York World newspaper, which was owned by Joseph Pulitzer. At that time, there were many rumors about a women's mental asylum located on Blackwell's Island in New York City. People said that the conditions there were terrible, that patients were treated badly, and that some women were sent there even if they were not mentally ill. However, no one had clear evidence, and the authorities did not take these claims seriously. Nellie Bly's editor asked her to investigate the situation. She immediately understood that this would be a dangerous assignment. In order to discover the truth, she would have to enter the asylum as a patient. This meant she had to convince doctors, police officers, and judges that she was mentally ill. It was a risky plan, because once she entered the system, it might be very difficult to get out again. To begin her investigation, Nellie moved into a boarding house for women in New York. There, she started to act in a strange and unusual way. She refused to sleep, stared at people without speaking, and said confusing things. She pretended to forget basic information about herself and behaved as if she was frightened and unstable. The other women in the house became worried and uncomfortable, and eventually they called the police. When the police arrived, they questioned her, but Nellie continued her performance. She gave unclear answers and acted as if she did not understand what was happening. As a result, the police decided that she was mentally disturbed and took her to a hospital for further examination. Several doctors examined her, but none of them realized that she was acting. After only a short evaluation, they declared her insane. This moment later became one of the most shocking parts of her story, because it showed how easily a person could be labeled mentally ill without proper evidence. After the examination, Nellie was sent to the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island. When she arrived, the doors closed behind her, and she officially became one of the patients. At that point, her role was no longer just an act. She was now inside a system where she had no control, and she depended entirely on the decisions of the doctors and staff. Very quickly, Nellie realized that the rumors were true. The conditions in the asylum were extremely poor. The building was cold, damp, and uncomfortable, especially during the winter. The beds were hard, and there were not enough blankets to keep the patients warm. The rooms were often dirty, and basic hygiene was neglected. The food was also of very low quality. Patients were given old bread, watery soup, and sometimes contaminated water, and many of them were constantly hungry and weak. Even more disturbing was the behavior of the staff. Instead of helping the patients, many nurses treated them with cruelty and impatience. They shouted at the women, insulted them, and in some cases even used physical force. The patients were afraid to speak or complain, because they knew that any resistance could lead to punishment or even worse treatment. There was a constant atmosphere of fear and silence. During her time in the asylum, Nellie spoke with many of the other patients, and what she discovered was deeply shocking. A significant number of the women were not actually mentally ill. Some were immigrants who could not speak English well, so they were misunderstood. Others were simply poor or had no family to support them. In some cases, Women were sent there because they behaved in ways that society considered unacceptable. Once they were inside the asylum, it was almost impossible for them to prove that they were sane. One of the most painful experiences Nellie described was the use of cold baths as a form of treatment. Patients were forced to sit in freezing water for long periods of time, without any explanation. They were not allowed to move, and the experience was both physically painful and emotionally humiliating. Nellie herself went through this treatment and later described it as a form of torture. After a few days, Nellie decided to stop acting and behave normally, hoping that the doctors would realize that she was not mentally ill. She spoke clearly, answered questions logically, and tried to explain the truth. However, nothing changed. The doctors continued to believe that she was insane. This was the most frightening moment, because she realized that once a person is labeled mentally ill, their words are no longer trusted, and it becomes almost impossible to escape. Nellie spent a total of 10 days inside the asylum. During this time, she carefully observed everything and memorized as many details as possible. She remained calm and focused, even though she was often afraid. Fortunately, her newspaper had arranged her release in advance. After 10 days, officials came to the asylum and informed the staff that Nellie Bly was not a patient, but a journalist. Once she was released, Nellie immediately began to write about her experience. Her articles were published in the New York World and quickly attracted public attention. Later, her work was collected into a book titled 10 Days in a Madhouse, in which she described the terrible conditions, the cruelty of the staff, and the injustice faced by many of the patients. The public reaction was strong and immediate. People were shocked and outraged by what they read. As a result of her work, an official investigation was launched into the asylum. The authorities increased funding for mental health institutions and introduced reforms to improve conditions and treatment. Although the system was not perfect, Nellie Bly's investigation led to real and important change. Today, Nellie Bly is remembered as a pioneer of investigative journalism. Her work showed that journalism can be a powerful tool for social change, and her courage inspired many others to follow in her footsteps. Her story reminds us that the truth is not always visible on the surface. Sometimes, it is hidden behind closed doors, silence, and fear. It also shows us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. If you enjoyed learning English through this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me create more content like this for you. And if you would like to support my work, you can buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.